Dim the lights, settle in, and prepare yourself for stories that will haunt your dreams and send shivers down your spine. Here at Tombstone Tales, we delve into the darkest corners of the internet, unearthing chilling stories of the supernatural, the unexplained, and the downright terrifying. From shadowy figures lurking in the night to sinister secrets buried deep in forgotten history, each episode is crafted to immerse you in a world of fear and fascination. Hit that subscribe button, join our community of thrill seekers, and embark on a journey where every whisper could be a warning and every shadow a threat. Are you ready to face your fears? Then let the story time begin. I was 6 years old and I saw him for the first time. It was a cold, dreary night, and the wind howled outside my bedroom window. My parents had tucked me in, kissed me goodnight, and turned off the lights, leaving only the dim glow of my nightlight to keep the shadows at bay. As I drifted off to sleep, I had no idea that my nights would soon be haunted by a figure who would instill a terror I couldn't escape. The dream began like any other. I was in my room, but everything felt slightly off. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, and the shadows seemed to pulse and shift. I lay in bed, unable to move, as a sense of impending dread washed over me. That's when I heard it. A faint rustling, like the sound of fabric brushing against itself. My heart pounded in my chest as I forced myself to turn my head. There, standing in the corner of my room, was a tall figure cloaked in darkness. He wore a long, tattered trench coat that billowed around his legs, and a wide-brimmed hat obscured his face. Despite the shadows, I could see his eyes, two glowing orbs that seemed to pierce through the darkness and into my soul. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping it was just a nightmare, that if I pretended to be asleep, he would go away. But the rustling grew louder, closer. I could hear him moving about my room, opening drawers, sifting through my belongings. My body trembled with fear, but I kept my eyes shut tight, praying he wouldn't notice me. Minutes felt like hours, and just when I thought the nightmare would never end, I felt a presence looming over me. I cracked my eyes open ever so slightly and saw him standing by my bed, staring down at me. His eyes glowed brighter, and I felt a scream rising in my throat. But before I could utter a sound, I woke up, drenched in sweat, heart racing. I was back in my room, safe and sound, but the terror of that dream lingered, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching me. The dreams didn't stop. Night after night, the Trenchcoat Man returned, always searching my room, always checking on me. As I grew older, the dreams became more vivid, more terrifying. I tried to tell my parents, but they dismissed it as a child's overactive imagination. Just a bad dream, they said. It'll pass. But it didn't pass. By the time I was 10, I had developed a ritual. I would stay awake as long as I could, fighting off sleep until exhaustion claimed me. In my dreams, I mastered the art of pretending to be asleep, my body perfectly still, my breathing even. But no matter how still I lay, he always seemed to sense that I was awake. His eyes would narrow, and he would move closer, his presence more menacing each time. When I was 12, the dream took a terrifying turn. Lying in bed, pretending to be asleep as usual, I felt his cold breath on my face. My eyes flew open, and he was right there, his glowing eyes inches from mine. He let out a guttural growl and lunged at me. I screamed, but no sound came out. I woke up in a state of sleep paralysis, my body rigid and unresponsive, the terror from the dream bleeding into my waking reality. I lay there, unable to move, convinced he was still in the room with me. My eyes darted around, but there was no sign of him. Slowly, painfully, my body began to respond, and I could move again. But the fear remained, a constant companion that haunted my nights and bled into my days. Years passed, and the dreams continued. I grew older, but the Trenchcoat Man remained unchanged, a constant, terrifying presence in my life. I tried everything, sleep aids, therapy, meditation, but nothing could keep him away. He was a shadow that loomed over me, a nightmare I couldn't escape. As a teenager, I became obsessed with finding an explanation for the dreams. I scoured the internet, read books on dreams and the supernatural, and even joined online forums where people shared their own nightmare experiences. But nothing quite matched the terror of the Trenchcoat Man. He was unique, a horror that seemed crafted just for me. My grades began to suffer as the lack of sleep took its toll. Friends drifted away, unable to understand my constant exhaustion and jumpiness. I felt isolated, trapped in a nightmare that no one else could see. The Trenchcoat Man's suspicion grew with each dream. He would linger longer by my bed, his eyes scanning my face as if searching for signs of wakefulness. I could feel his breath on my skin, hear the rustle of his coat as he moved. The fear was paralyzing, a weight that pressed down on me night after night. During one particularly bad night, I decided to confront him. In the dream, as he loomed over me, I opened my eyes wide and screamed, "What do you want from me?" His reaction was immediate and violent. He let out a roar of rage and lunged at me, his hands reaching for my throat. I woke up with a start, my body locked in sleep paralysis. The sensation of his hands around my neck lingered, and I gasped for breath, tears streaming down my face. I knew then that the dreams were becoming more dangerous. The Trenchcoat Man was no longer content to search my room. He was coming for me. The fear was overwhelming, and I didn't know how much more I could take. I started avoiding sleep altogether, staying up for days on end until my body could no longer sustain it. But exhaustion only made the dreams more vivid, more real. By the time I reached high school, I was a shadow of my former self. The Trenchcoat Man was a constant presence in my life, and I couldn't escape him. Every night, I would lie in bed, my body tense with anticipation, waiting for the dream to begin. And every night he would come, his eyes glowing with a malevolent light, his hands reaching for me. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't live like this anymore. I confided in my best friend, Sarah, who was the only person who believed me. Together, we devised a plan. I would confront the Trenchcoat Man once and for all, and this time I wouldn't wake up. I would stay in the dream and find out what he wanted. The night of the confrontation, I lay in bed, my heart pounding with fear. I forced myself to relax, to breathe deeply, and soon I drifted off to sleep. The dream began as it always did, with the Trenchcoat Man searching my room. I watched him from beneath my lashes, waiting for the right moment. When he leaned over me, I opened my eyes and grabbed his arm. "Who are you? What do you want? Why do I see you every night?" I demanded, my voice filled with fear and determination. For a moment, he looked taken aback, but then his eyes narrowed, and he yanked his arm free. "You shouldn't have done that," he growled, his voice a low, menacing rumble. He lunged at me, and I braced myself for the impact. But instead of waking up, I found myself still in the dream, my body paralyzed with fear. He grabbed me by the throat, his grip like iron, and I gasped for breath. "What do you want?" I choked out, my vision blurring. He leaned in close, his eyes boring into mine. "You don't understand," he hissed. "I'm trying to protect you. Relax and close your eyes." With a final squeeze, he released me, and I woke up, my body trembling with fear and confusion. His words echoed in my mind. What did he mean by protecting me? And from what? Years passed, and I learned to live with the dreams. I still had them, but I had become numb to the fear. It was just a part of my life now, a nightmare that never truly ended. I graduated from college, got a job, and tried to move on with my life. But the Trenchcoat Man was always there, lurking in the shadows of my mind. During the summer, I decided to take a vacation to clear my head. I rented a small cabin in a quiet town by the lake, hoping that the change of scenery would help me find some peace. The first few days were blissful. I spent my time hiking, reading, and enjoying the tranquility of nature. For the first time in years, I felt truly relaxed. One evening, I decided to take a walk along the lake. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the water, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me. As I walked, I noticed a house in the distance. It looked abandoned, its windows dark and empty. Curious, I approached it, peering through the dusty windows, and then I saw him. The Trenchcoat Man stood in the center of the room, his back to me. My heart stopped, and I stumbled back, my mind reeling with disbelief. How could he be here in the real world? Panic surged through me, and I turned and ran, not stopping until I reached my cabin. I locked the doors and windows, my breath coming in ragged gasps. For the first time in years, I felt truly terrified. The Trenchcoat Man wasn't just a figment of my imagination. He was real. What was he, and how had he found me? Desperate for answers, I turned to the internet. I scoured forums and message boards, searching for anyone who had experienced something similar. It didn't take long to find others who shared my nightmare. People from all over the world described the same Trenchcoat Man, the same glowing eyes, the same sense of dread. I connected with a group of people who called themselves the Dreamers. They had been having the same dream for years, just like me. We shared our stories, our fears, and our theories. Some believed he was a ghost, others thought he was a demon, but no one knew for sure. While chatting with the Dreamers one night, I noticed a new member join the group. They introduced themselves as Watcher and claimed to have information about the Trenchcoat Man. Intrigued, I messaged them privately, asking for more details. Watcher responded quickly, their message cryptic but intriguing. "The Trenchcoat Man is real," they wrote. "He's been haunting people for generations, searching for something. But he's not evil. He's trying to protect us from something much worse." I asked what he was trying to protect us from, but Watcher didn't respond. Frustrated and curious, I continued to dig, hoping to find more answers. The more I learned, the more terrified I became. The Trenchcoat Man was real, and he was coming for me. I couldn't escape him no matter how far I ran. I decided that the only way to stop him was to confront him head-on. I needed to find out what he was searching for and why he was haunting my dreams. Weeks were spent preparing. I gathered supplies, researched protective spells and rituals, and set up traps around my cabin. I was determined to catch him and get the answers I needed. As I lay in bed one night, I felt a familiar sense of dread wash over me. I knew he was coming. I closed my eyes, feigning sleep, and waited. The rustling sound grew louder, and I felt his presence in the room. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. When I felt him leaning over me, I sprang into action. I activated the traps I had set, and the room was filled with blinding light and a deafening noise. The Trenchcoat Man recoiled, his glowing eyes wide with surprise. "You can't escape me. I need to know the truth." The Trenchcoat Man lunged at me, but I was ready. I dodged his grasp and activated another trap, a circle of salt that surrounded him, trapping him in place. He struggled, his eyes burning with anger, but he couldn't break free. Stepped closer, my hands shaking. "Who are you?" I demanded. "What do you want from me?" He stared at me, his glowing eyes piercing into mine. "I'm not your enemy," he growled. "I've been trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" I shouted, the fear and frustration boiling over. A chilling silence filled the room, the only sound the pounding of my heart. He hesitated, his eyes flickering with an unreadable emotion. "From what's coming," he said finally. "You have no idea what you've unleashed." Before I could ask more, the air in the room grew colder, and a low, menacing rumble reverberated through the walls. The Trenchcoat Man's eyes widened with genuine fear, a sight that sent a shiver down my spine. "It's too late," he whispered, more to himself than to me. It's found us. A shadow darker than the night itself began to coalesce in the corner of the room. I could feel its malevolent presence, a palpable, suffocating force that made it hard to breathe. The Trenchcoat Man turned to face it, his stance one of grim determination. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice steady despite the terror in his eyes. "No matter what happens, do not look at it directly." The shadow expanded, taking on a vaguely humanoid shape. Two glowing red eyes emerged, burning with an ancient, insatiable hunger. It let out a guttural growl, a sound that seemed to resonate within my very bones. The Trenchcoat Man reached into his coat and pulled out a small, ornate box. He muttered something under his breath, words that seemed to warp the air around them. The box glowed faintly, a warm, golden light that pushed back the darkness ever so slightly. But the shadow entity was not deterred. It surged forward, an inky mass of terror and despair. The Trenchcoat Man stood his ground, holding the box out in front of him like a shield. "I won't let you take her," he shouted, his voice echoing with a defiance I hadn't expected. The shadow creature hissed, a sound that filled my ears with an unbearable, high-pitched screech. I clamped my hands over my ears, trying to block it out, but it was no use. The sound seemed to pierce through everything, a weapon of pure, unadulterated fear. The Trenchcoat Man's box glowed brighter, and for a moment, it seemed to hold the creature at bay. But then, with a horrifying clarity, I saw the shadow's true form, an ancient, writhing mass of darkness, tentacles of shadow reaching out hungrily. With a final, desperate effort, the Trenchcoat Man thrust the box towards the creature. The golden light flared, and the shadow recoiled, screeching in rage. For a brief, shining moment I thought we might be saved. But then the light flickered and died. The box fell from the Trenchcoat Man's hands, clattering to the floor. His eyes widened in shock and despair as the shadow surged forward, engulfing him in its darkness. I watched, paralyzed with terror, as the Trenchcoat Man was consumed. His screams were cut short, and in his place, the shadow seemed to grow stronger, its eyes burning brighter. I stumbled back, my mind racing. There was no escape, no place to hide. The creature turned its gaze to me, and I felt its cold, unrelenting hunger. With a final, desperate scream, I fled from the cabin, the creature's presence haunting my every step. I ran through the forest, branches tearing at my skin, the darkness closing in around me. As I reached the edge of the lake, I saw my reflection in the water, pale, terrified, and alone. The shadow loomed behind me, its red eyes glowing with triumph. And then, with a sudden, horrifying realization, I understood. The Trenchcoat Man hadn't been trying to protect me from the creature. He had been trying to protect the world from me. The shadow surged forward, and the last thing I saw was its red eyes, burning with an unquenchable hunger. The darkness swallowed me whole, and I felt myself dissolve into it, becoming one with the nightmare that had haunted my dreams for so long. The lake was still, the night silent once more, and in the reflection, two red eyes gleamed from the depths, waiting for the next dreamer to come.